All right, welcome to another episode of the Ultideic Podcast. We just wanted to talk today a little bit about magic systems, and this will be a little bit of a world building uh, example, a discussion on how we developed our magic system, but magic systems in general, how they work, how they integrate it into the world, a little bit of how they are developed or how we developed ours, and talk about the differences between the magic systems that we've thrown in. So without further ado, we're going to jump right into it. And just to start us off, I'd like to talk about the different types of magic systems that are out there. A lot of authors have used a variety of tools to show their magic systems to their audiences. And a lot of times we can classify them as hard or soft magic systems. Todd, do you want to go into what those two definitions are, and we can talk about some examples and what we like and don't like of each?
Yeah, and it's probably worth mentioning. Not everyone agrees with these. How we're going to describe these, what falls inside or into one category or another. And Brandon Sanderson, who teaches a course on fantasy writing at Brigham Young University, I think has done a lot to help clarify these definitions. So we're going to be borrowing heavily from the way that he tends to structure it, but we recognize that these aren't universally agreed upon terms, but it's a useful framework for our discussion today.
And I think they're common enough because I've heard them in many other
they become
forums
pretty standard.
Outside of that conversation, and I think they're standard enough that we can use it as a general framework as we're discussing this with anyone out there.
Yep. So a soft magic system tends to refer to a system where the rules, limits, costs, the particular mechanics of how the magic works are not clearly defined or spelled out for the reader. So the typical example, or the maybe preeminent example of soft magic systems, is Tolkien. So Gandalf, the wizard, can just do magical things, but Tolkien in the books never explains the rules or the origin, the source of Gandalf's powers. He just does fantastical things, and soft systems are great for creating in the readers a sense of wonder, a sense of awe, a sense of mystery, because it's not well understood. So these things can just come out of nowhere. The risk with soft magic is it can feel at times a little Deus ex machina, right? That because you don't know what the rules were, and then something magical happens and they get out of the tough situation. It's like, well, that doesn't really feel earned because you could just come up with anything to get them out of it. Now, Tolkien did a great job of not making it feel that way, despite the risks. But there are others who definitely, like in the first law, there's risks that a lot of people have the criticism like, well, you never told us about this rule, and then you just come up at, in whatever given situation, you're like, oh yeah, there's this other rule, and now this is how the magic's going to go, and it just always feels unearned. So that's the risk. On the other end is the hard magic system, where the rules are very clearly defined. The costs are clearly laid out up front, and the author doesn't deviate from those. But maybe, the best written hard fantasy systems find creative applications of the magic within these clearly defined, limited, bounded rules. And Sanderson is probably recognized as one of the preeminent hard magic system, like in Mistborn with Allomancy, being able to, when you consume particular metals, it gives you the power that's associated with that, and the costs and limitations that come along with that. And then he finds very creative ways to use those rules to do amazing things. So that's
I
kind of the hard soft dichotomy.
I sometimes hear people talk about the why, as the difference between hard and soft, and why Sanderson's works the way it does is because they're consuming metals and burning those metals to create the effect. Now, he doesn't tell you necessarily every he doesn't answer every why
Right.
in that question. Um, but with Tolkien, we knew, for instance, that Gandalf couldn't just snap his fingers and teleport everybody to Mount Doom and drop the ring in. But we don't know why he couldn't do that, nor why he could stop the Balrog on the
Right.
bridge.
Right.
But I mean, there's lots of times in that area where it's just wonderful and mysterious, and we as readers never get to understand why that magic system works. Whereas in the hard system, usually it's spelled out so that the reader understands, hey, this is the limitations, and then they're marveling at how they've creatively worked within that limited set to be able to do something unique or unexpected.
Right.
And so for me, the why a lot of times is a helpful way to think about it, even though admittedly no one always answers all of the whys, or we'd get to a mundane world like ours, and nobody wants that.
Well, we're going to talk about how close we get to that
Yeah.
when it comes to ours. But ours, like just on that soft versus hard, and we'll get into more details. But where would you place us on the spectrum?
Um, I think like many authors, you'd probably say you're somewhere in the middle. We have elements of the soft magic system. I hope that we leave that wonder out there. But I would say when you look into it a little further, it's got far more elements of hard than soft. We've outlined what can and can't be done. There's limitations on each of the magic systems that we've employed, and I think we've given the reader a sense that there are limitations in each of these areas, even if we haven't yet told them where that limitation is. They understand that it's there, and that distance plays a big factor in it. So I would say probably more on the hard side, but I think there's an argument to be made that there's a soft element to it as well.
Well, yes, and I think you mentioned something important. So, two things. One, we have way more rules than we ever explain in the book, particularly when it comes to the natural magic system. So,
Yeah.
We've laid out some of those on our website. Like we have articles in our wiki about the modalities and et cetera. We'll get to those as well. But we've explained in more detail on our website in the wiki some of the rules. We don't always explain all of those in detail in the book.
Thank goodness.
That might be boring, in part because we have way more rules. So one of Brandon's writing devices when it comes to magic systems is he has a relatively limited set of rules for his magic system. His magic systems in the Cosmere operate on a limited set of rules, and then the creativity comes in the interesting ways that they operate within those rules. We did something very different. We wanted it to be rule-based a lot, but we think it's boring to explain all those. And within the world, within the story context, a lot of people don't understand all the rules. It's like, our evolving understanding of physics, let's say. We have a decent understanding of quantum physics, I would say, but there's lots of mysteries in quantum physics or in astrophysics, like dark energy, dark matter, lots of things. And our understanding is constantly evolving. We're learning new things, the same with magic. So we have acknowledged that there are rules around how magic works that aren't well understood even within the world. And as a result, we can write things where people do stuff even without knowing exactly the mechanics, even though we've envisioned that there are rules of reality that govern every aspect of how magic works. We don't seek to explain all of those because they're extremely complex and probably haven't all been discovered within the world.
Yeah.
So,
And I think that's an important point, that the author needs to understand what the rules are, what the limitations are, even if they're
right.
not going to communicate it to the reader. Otherwise, it is going to just seem like some form of plot armor,
That's right.
that whatever needs to happen, it can
Will
happen.
happen.
My
Yeah.
kids and I often joke about Wakanda. If there's something you can't explain, it's Wakanda.
It's Wakanda.
And
Yeah.
and yeah, it's a funny way to look at it, but at the same time, we wanted to make sure that as authors, we knew where that limitation was,
Right.
so that we were setting consistent boundaries, and it wasn't just constantly being stretched to where it really seems like anything is possible if the writer wants it to be.
Yeah.
And that you need to make sure that you're adhering to those boundaries and you know where they are, even if you haven't spelled it out and have no intention of spelling it entirely out. And there are benefits to not spelling it all out. It certainly takes away some of the mystery when you can see the entirety of all of that. But I think some people enjoy that too. And I think my goal was to try to find a balance between that. Give the
Yep.
reader enough that they understand it, but not so much that it bores 98% and the 2% that love it stick around.
Yeah, there's definitely a potential for becoming pedantic and being boring with too much detail. Now,
yeah, but I think the way we developed our magic system, though, kind of led to that blend. Because we didn't start out creating a hard magic system. Do you want to just jump into where we started from and how we got here?
So
you have half an hour.
We won't go that long, but
thank you.
We again originally were anticipating making this into a game like Dungeons and Dragons, a tabletop role-playing game, and our early formative years within fantasy was heavily influenced by playing Dungeons and Dragons, which has spell magic. The magic system is basically spells. They're very discrete. They have a certain time limit, time that to cast the spell, components, whether there's verbal or material components or some kind of action you have to take. And then it has a very predefined effect. And those work very well within game mechanics. And since we started off thinking about this as a game, even when we switched to writing, or when we started writing a story, it was to develop a game with the purpose of developing games. So we were thinking very much in terms of spell-based magic systems. And so our characters who were magic, had magic capabilities, we conceived of their actions within different scenes in terms of spells, fireballs or lightning or whatever. We weren't terribly sophisticated in thinking about new magic systems.
Right.
As we wrote, we, rather than thinking about a magic system, we just decided what magic effects we wanted to show on the page that we thought were cool. And so we had a smattering of just random magical effects that we thought would sound cool in the book. And we realized, okay, we're running into problems, and we have some people who can seem to have psychic abilities that we're calling magic. We have other people who seem to alter the world. What is the basis of these? What are the limitations? Those kind of things. We were running into problems. And as we started trying to answer our own questions about what are the limits, what are the mechanics, what can and can't be done, we realized, okay, we're way behind the 8 ball on how to structure this in a way that allows us to write realistically. So as we developed it, we came up with a natural magic system, one that alters the natural world, interacts with the natural world. And that is our system that's based on Nilan. And we'll talk about that in a minute. And then the other one is sort of a divine magic system that is based on drawing upon the power of the gods. Now, that had some similarities to the way that Dungeons and Dragons works in its very high level conceptual framework. The details, however, are very different between the two. In Dungeons and Dragons, for example, you can have two people who basically have the same kind of spell effect. They just draw on different power sources to make that same thing happen. In our writing, they're very different. The divine magic system, as we'll get into, is really has more to do with what you might call psychic abilities, whereas the natural magic system really is about shaping the outside world. You can't influence people's thoughts with the divine or with the natural magic system. You can only do that with the divine magic system. So we'll get into that here in a little more detail. And probably the place to start, if we start with the natural magic system, is what is Elan? You want to answer that?
Yeah, I'll give it my best shot. And before we do that, though, I do want to say, I think when we were writing, it was kind of a little bit reductionist, as in we weren't writing with the idea of spells in mind. We wrote, and it was a very soft magic system when we started. They just did the things that we wanted them to do because it looked cool. We realized over time that we needed to have costs behind it. We needed to have limitations on what they could and couldn't do. It wasn't acceptable for us anymore. And what we were doing was we were writing a soft magic system and then thinking, how would I explain it if I was to put it in game terms, rather than trying to put game terms into the story. And so we had characters that were priestly, and we wanted them to wield divine powers, and we had characters that wielded the divine or the natural magic of our world, which we call Elan. And so we decided we can't just go with traditional roles or anything like that. We wanted to make clear definitions. So for us, Elan is all about manipulating the world around you. And Elan is what most people would think of as wizards or sorcerers or some natural magic that exists. Elan is about changing the way things interact with the world, changing the properties of the world around you. It doesn't allow you to fly or to break the laws of nature, but it allows you to bend it quite a bit.
So let's maybe start at a ground level. So Elan is not the magic system. Elan is a natural phenomenon. It is the power of life. The manipulation of Elan lets you do magical things. And that process of manipulating Elan to alter the world is called metalon. But Elan itself is a life energy, if you will. It is ubiquitous. It's universal. It is connected to every type of matter. It's in every person and blade of grass and rock and everything, in the air or the water, everywhere. There's nowhere without Elan. Elan
and I should say, depending on the part of the world, there is greater or lesser Elan. So we in a barren landscape, you're not finding a lot of life in those areas. Does it exist? And yes, but it's much more scarce.
So here's the way. So Elan, in, let's say, empty space, is very. It's not densely concentrated. It's very spread out and diffuse, and so there's very little of it. As matter tends to collect, Elan tends to be in concentration with the density of matter, with a caveat. So rocks have more Elan in it than empty space, right? But rocks don't have very much compared to, say, plants. So the higher the life form, and this is the thing about the tendency, Elan tends to move matter as it concentrates, as it gets more and more concentrated. The matter that it's attached to tends to be higher and higher life forms, driving towards more and more consciousness. So Elan is a life giving substance phenomenon in the universe that, as it concentrates, tends to lead towards biological life, and that biological life at higher concentrations tends towards conscious life. And so in the world, and there's another phenomenon, which is the less advanced the organization of matter, so inanimate matter, let's say, the elan is really easy to siphon off, but it's very
Right.
diffuse so that you don't get a lot of benefit of it. In grass or plants, trees, there's more life than in rocks, but the elan is more tightly bound to that organized matter. And so it's harder to pull elan out to siphon it off. When you get to animal life, it's even more conscious life. It's even more, and humans, other than the gods, are the highest form of intelligent life on the world. And so a human's elan is tightly bound to their body, to their organism, and it's almost impossible for someone else to siphon off another human's elan against their will or without their cooperation. And so those are the phenomenons of elan, is that it's a natural occurring phenomenon that tends to drive matter towards greater organization, biological order, and eventually consciousness.
Okay, so now that we've put everybody to sleep, let's talk about how it's organized and some of the costs and limitations behind it. So if you think of elan as this life force, most Elantir, or those that practice Metalon, that practice the manipulation of elan, or that natural magic system in the world, most of them would look at elan as a spectrum, and there's some portions of this life energy that's sharper than others or duller than others, and that's usually the terms that they'll use. And we call those the modalities. It's almost as if they've organized it up into frequencies, or these modalities based on sharpness or dullness. And those modalities determine what portion of the natural world that particular amount of elan, or that type of elan, can alter. That could be things from releasing heat or absorbing heat, making something cold. It could be the bonds, bonding two things together, or repelling two things. All of those are examples of some of the modalities and what they can and can't do. And again, they're outlined in detail. We don't need to get into the specifics here. But as we went through that spectrum of all of the modalities, we tried to outline what could and couldn't be possible for an Elantir.
Yeah. Now, what I will say again, and you begin to get the flavor of this in the book. So the modalities, like another metaphor, like Bob, you described the sharpness. That's maybe the sensation that a lot of people use to describe what it feels like when they're channeling elan. In terms of the physics of elan, modalities, you could maybe think of the modalities like the electromagnetic spectrum, right? Like there's ultraviolet, there's the visible light spectrum, there's radio waves, gamma rays, X-rays. Those are all electromagnetic radiation at different frequencies. So it's all one thing. The different modalities are not different types of elan. Elan is a single thing, but it can be modulated at different, let's say frequencies is a metaphor, at different frequencies. And those frequencies can then be used to create different effects. And you can take different portions of elan, attune them to different modalities, and combine that elan in two different modalities, or three, or whatever, to create different effects. Whether it's causing plants to grow more rapidly, or whatever it is, that is done by attuning elan and then feeding that elan into matter and then causing the effect. like you said, heat or loosening bonds or tightening bonds, etc. So the elan can be used through these different modalities and combinations of modalities to cause these different effects. So what are the costs and limitations of elan? One of the costs is, first of all, the physical pain that you described. It
Mm-hmm.
it feels very uncomfortable as you try to channel elan, especially if you're pulling on your own elan, because an Elantir who's trained can pull their own elan out of their body and then use it to manipulate the world. That has its own risks. You can deplete yourself or even kill yourself if you if you pull too much of
You
your
go too
elan
far.
out. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or it can leave you exhausted if you take too much of your own elan out of your body. And elan, like energy, tends to seek equilibrium. So if you pull elan out of a place in the world, like plants, let's say, and you pulled a bunch of elan out, it creates a lower density of elan than the natural world is used to. Elan from the surrounding area will tend to try to fill in that gap. So elan, almost like water, tends to seek equilibrium. As a result, if you were, well, there's another phenomenon that needs to go along with that, and that is the further away you're trying to either pull elan from or push elan to, it gets exponentially, it's sort of the square of the distance, right? And this is maybe getting into too much of the physics, but the point is that we have very specific rules, physics rules, around how this whole system works. Those are not always made explicit in the book, and that's how we have this mix between the hard system, where we have very specific rules that we're aware of, and the limitations that poses that we can stay consistent to, but we don't always show that to the reader,
Right.
in terms of the costs.
And I think that that's why sometimes I believe people can get the impression that there is a soft magic system in a work, any work, not just ours.
Right.
When in reality, to the author, they see the limitations and the costs, and it's much more of a hard system. I think of ours as a hard system, but I can empathize with those that don't understand all of the costs and limitations behind it, don't quite see the why, so they're inclined to look at it as a soft system instead of a hard.
Now, another question that often comes up with magic systems is, in the world, do you have to be, like, are only certain special people born with the ability to perform magic? Can anybody do it? Is it just a matter of education and training? How would you talk about that for ours?
Well, and I think for us, we didn't want to have this. Very few people are ever born with the gift of magic. We wanted it to be more of a learned. Yeah. Now we do. There are some exceptions. There are individuals or peoples that seem to not have the ability to do elan,
right?
To perform metalan. However, those are the exception and not the rule. In general, it's accepted throughout the world that with enough practice you can get good. Now it's just like basketball. If I practice
any skill
my whole life, am I ever going to be as good as LeBron James? Yep, probably not. Anybody that's seen me knows, that guy's not destined for the Basketball Hall of Fame. Could I be much better? Of course I could be much better. So you have different
levels you are
of talent.
Not better than LeBron.
Yeah, exactly.
Just to be clear.
That I didn't think that needed clarification, but apparently it did. So I think Elantir are the same. It is generally believed, with a few exceptions, and Barrick, one of the main characters in the book, is one of those exceptions. He does not have the ability with metalan at all.
Which is common for his people, the Kinesi. Yeah.
Exactly. The Kinesi are known to not have that ability. He's fascinated with it. He knows a lot about it. He can explain a lot to the reader, but he doesn't have the innate ability to to manipulate Elon, uh, as most people would be able to. Andric is able to and is gifted at it, whereas Stafir, his brother, could do a little bit of it, but was clearly not. It did not come as easily to him as it did to Andric. It doesn't mean that Andric is necessarily some protege. You would find that anywhere,
Right.
in the world, that there's differences between our abilities as we start to learn things. And I think as we write, we're writing with the understanding that most people believe that anyone could learn Metalon, but not everyone has necessarily the gift to be great at it. And to some, it will come easier than others.
And so
it requires a lot of study and work
to do anything significant. Now,
yeah,
a lot of people might perform Metalon at a very rudimentary level to do little things around the house, right? Like if you're tying a knot in a rope and you just want it to hold a little more tightly because it keeps coming loose, someone might be able to just tighten the rope a little bit so that it doesn't keep slipping, right? When you tie a knot, something like that. There are mundane uses of Elan that are ubiquitous through society. Like lots of people do little tiny things with Elan, potentially. Or at least there's a lot of people in the world who interact with someone who can do Elan at a rudimentary level. Some like a wise man or a wise woman who might be a healer with herbs in their local village might be able to do a little bit of channeling or whatever, or the blacksmith might be able to use a little bit of Elan in reshaping the metal or something. Like people, it's sort of ubiquitous, and we made magic intentionally something that probably most people have a very rudimentary familiarity with the fact that it exists. It's not something that only happens in distant lands or in the wizard in a tower somewhere, and otherwise their life is entirely mundane like on Earth. In our world, it's exactly the opposite. It's everywhere, but it's everywhere in really mundane ways that are so routine for people they probably don't recognize it as anything interesting or extraordinary because it's relatively mundane, and so they don't take it into account. It becomes background noise, and so we don't draw attention to it in our writing because it's everywhere and most people aren't conscious of it. So for example, Andric has one of the princes, not just Andric, but as one of the characters, his armor might last longer than anybody else's because he's received armor and weapons that have been elantically hardened. And so they just last longer than unelantically treated weapons. But he doesn't think about it as a magic sword, right? So he doesn't think about having magic weapons. So we never describe the prince as having magic armor or magic weapons. It's just so ubiquitous that it's everywhere. So, and that...
Yeah, there's Elantic methodology that's used in the crafting of those items, but it doesn't necessarily make them...
If you can afford Elantir to be involved, right?
Right, exactly.
So that's the Elantic system of magic. Now we also have a divine system of magic that's based on divinessence. Should we start with what is divinessence, or anything else you want to say about Elan?
Actually, just a transition between the two. I thought it was interesting the transformation that we did in our own storytelling. As we started out, we had the traditional idea that these Elantir could manipulate the physical world, but as far as the divine side goes, we wanted to make them healers. But as we went into the writing of the story and started to define these things, we realized that it would make more sense for an Elantir manipulating Metalon would be able to manipulate the natural world to help,
including your body,
help with healing.
Yeah.
So with your consent, they could cooperate with you to be able to repair a body. So the healers in the world, the physicians of the world, would have been Elantir, not divine magic users. So when we when we recognized that it fit more with our other magic system, we started to go, okay, well, what does that mean? What does that leave for the divine side? And what we came up with was a little bit about how the gods connect with people. And we wanted to make it more of a connecting one person to another, or connecting to the world around you a little bit more. So we came up with our divinessence system as our second form of magic, and that divinessence is the term for the magical field that the gods use to manipulate the world around them. Not physically manipulate, but to connect with people, to give impressions, to communicate, to bring people closer together. And
Uh,
I think as we started to go that route, we realized we wanted this more to be a magic system of the mind. What can expand the mind? What could the mind do? Can the mind see other places? Can the mind connect with others at a distance?
well, and
Those are some examples
I,
of
I think what you
how
said,
that works.
yeah, I think what you said before is really important, is that it's just an extension of what the gods themselves, how they connect with
Yeah.
us. It's sharing in that ability with humans. So
Yep.
uh, divinessence as a word is just a combination of divine and essence. So the divine essence of the gods radiates throughout the universe, throughout existence. And that divine essence or divinessence is a power that enables two consciousnesses to connect. So as we try to think on earth in our own experience, how does God inspire us? How does God connect to the human heart, the human mind, the human soul? How have we experienced a connection with God? It's probably most closely described, most accurately described in our experience as like a psychic connection. God, his consciousness or whatever, his spirit connects to ours, and we feel impressions, we feel his love, we feel whatever as an internal subjective experience coming from wherever else in the universe he is, right? Or outside the universe or whatever.
Yeah.
And so in our world, in our fantasy world, in Baon, each of the gods radiates a spirit, if you will, an essence that is consistent with their own personality, their own nature, based on their philosophy. So Terathia, to the extent that she's domineering, let's say, her when you're in her presence, you're going to feel that dominating feeling from her, and so when people when humans are attuned to her philosophy, they naturally attune or are aligned with her divine essence, and they can feel it. And then, just like she can connect to our mind, as they connect to her divine essence, it allows them to, through channeling her divine essence, to likewise open a connection between their mind and someone else's mind. So the same things that the gods can do through their own divine power, humans can do the same functions that the gods do, on albeit a obviously far more limited basis, but it's the same thing. So divinessence is the power of the gods radiating out into the universe. And as people align and attune with that, they can then access some of the same magical capabilities that the gods have.
Yeah, it's kind of like the Elan might have been the power of the creation or manipulating the world around them, and divinessence is the power of connecting with those around you, or connecting with that world in general.
Well, the magic system that's based on divinessence. That's
Yes,
not what divinessence itself is. Divinessence is the
correct.
essence of the god, but the magic system that's based on divinessence is one of connecting hearts and minds to one
Yeah.
another. So uh, maybe talk for a moment about what alignment and attunement are as concepts for being able to practice this magic system.
Yeah, for us, we wanted to have a differentiation between somebody who is close to a particular god and somebody who has learned to manipulate this divinessence, this divine energy that the gods use to have these magical effects. So, alignment is bringing your life uh, to where it's, I'm going to say closely aligned, but that's using the term to define the term. I recognize that. But it's bringing your life and your thoughts so that they parallel those of the deity. And nobody's going to get it 100%, but the closer you are in alignment with that particular deity, the more the easier it is for you to feel that particular divinessence and to be connected to the god. Attunement is very different, though, and that is actually being able to not just align yourself. You have to be aligned in order to attune. In most cases, and attunement means that you're accessing the divinessence. It's not that you're just bringing yourself
Into
closely to
harmony.
parallel
Yeah.
that God, but you're actually accessing the divinessence. You're reaching out, holding the divinessence, and finding a way for you to be in harmony with that divinessence so that you can then manipulate it.
Right.
It's almost like alignment is just bringing yourself to look like something. Attunement is actually to reach out and grab that something and then
Right.
do something with it.
Right. And so then the magic, the things that a person can do with when they're attuned to the divinessence, we call, well, most of the things you can do are called benefactions.
Right.
And those, is there a limit to what the benefactions are? Are there unlimited things you can do? Is there anything you can sort of wrap your mind around, or
So we've actually limited it to very few benefactions. You could almost think of benefactions as spells. They are abilities that are granted through learning how to use that divinessence for that particular purpose. Not everybody is practiced enough to perform any particular benefaction. Some people only know rudimentary ones, and some of them are easier than others. I'm going to use an example of communion. In our world, communion is the ability to link one mind to another so you can communicate telepathically. That's a very common benefaction for people to learn. One of the first ones that most people who are able to attune and learn to attune, that's one of the first ones that they're granted access to. And that's a very common benefaction. There are other benefactions, such as being able to see something at a distant location, being able to
like
uh,
psychic viewing?
yeah, psychic viewing, for instance, or being able to uh, have an object and see some history about the object. Where has it been? Who has touched it? Those kind of things. Those are things that are much more specialized, and most people that can attune and use divinessence, that have some benefactions, most of them don't learn that specialized benefaction, and those that do that are usually very practiced at that and few others because of the amount of work it takes to be able to do that particular thing. There's really no one out there that has mastered all of the benefactions, although there are plenty of people that have studied and would have a good understanding and maybe even a rudimentary use of everything. But they're very specialized. So we've outlined what they can and can't do, um, and most people understand that that's very limited.
Do
There
you have,
are some that are more common than others. Go ahead.
Do you have to be a priest to be able to perform benefactions? Is there some
No,
ritual involved with it?
you have to be able to attune and you have to learn. So it helps to be a priest because the priests study these kinds of things. There are some people that gain it naturally, just like there are some people that can use Elan and have figured things out on their own. In other worlds, they might be called hedge wizards or whatever. Somebody who has learned through trial and error, you will see that also. And there are some worshipers that are so closely aligned that they learn attunement. That's very common, but you don't have to be a priest in order to learn these things. Since the priests are most focused on aligning themselves with the deity, and in many cases attuning to that
Right.
divinessence, it's very common that the priests have a lot of knowledge of the benefactions, and but it's not exclusive to them.
Right.
Especially when you get to somebody, like Akrahar, who doesn't really have priests or believe in that.
Exactly.
Then usually those that learn it through trial and error rather than any kind of organized
Right.
teaching.
But so it's a skill, and
Mm-hmm.
there's certainly some like book learning you can do to understand the concepts and understand what you should be doing. So being educated, taking classes on
Yeah,
benefactions would be helpful, which again mostly is given to priests. Some places might be more protective of that knowledge and limit the knowledge of benefactions to, to priests. They keep it within the clergy, but there's nothing that says you need to be a cleric in order for the magic to work. Anyone can do these things
yeah,
if they can figure it out. And uh, the the so being psychic, having psychic abilities, whether that's being able to see things from a distance or communicating telepathically, has some real challenges. And we show some of the characters in the book who are sitting down for a practice session to try to improve their skill at doing more advanced techniques with these things, because they're all skills and you need in order to get better, you have to practice them and gain the discipline and the control, etc., to be able to do them
yeah,
well. And uh, because it's a skill, like you said, most people don't master multiple benefactions. Like um, in Dungeons and Dragons, let's say, as you level up, you just automatically gain access to new spells. It's supposed to reflect maybe your increasing knowledge or connection to divinity. But with benefactions, it doesn't work that way. It's just a new skill, and like learning any new skill, it may take years to be able to get good at anything.
yeah.
Um,
And a high priest might be really good at organizing a church and maintaining all of the different things that an organization needs to go, but it may not be somebody who has spent significant time studying the benefactions and knows all of these obscure ones. They're probably familiar with it because of their schooling, but
it,
they have they have a set of skills that are for governing that particular church. There might be some benefactions that are very common and that they know routinely, and they probably employ some of those benefactions routinely, but they aren't necessarily the experts.
so,
So,
so you mentioned
leveling up
Akrahar.
doesn't really work that way.
Yeah, you mentioned
Yeah.
Akrahar doesn't have any priests. Are there any differences in the way the divinessence works or the effects? Do you need to follow mm, Viance in order to gain access to any particular benefactions? Are there any benefactions that are unique to any of the gods, or does the magic work different based on which god you're worshiping, or how does that work?
No, so we've made it to where the benefactions are pretty universal. Although there are some, Viance, who studies learning, has a vested interest in encouraging some of her priests or scholars to delve into certain niche benefactions. So you might find the Viancian priests to be a little bit more into some of the benefactions,
Like
whereas
seeing into the
those
past, they can
exactly,
they can view past history psychically.
yeah. And you might go to your local priest if you worship a different god, and they aren't able to do that particular ability, but they happen to know that the Viancian priest in the
Right.
area can, and they would try to collaborate and work with that Viancian priest to be able to get the answers they need to, a mystery or whatever they're looking for, to use that as an example.
Yeah, but followers of any god theoretically can perform any of the benefactions. Very briefly, there's another thing that you can do with divinessence that isn't a benefaction.
It's not psychic.
Yeah, that's not psychic. And that's summoning. Do you want to talk about summoning for just a moment?
Yeah, so summoning is a little bit of a unique ability in that it's not connecting with someone here. It's actually making a connection with that realm wherever the deities are, and that's not defined clearly in the book. But wherever they are living, their realm, you're making a connection with that realm and with something in that realm. And it is the act of making that connection and kind of parting reality to align, make a gate or a channel for something in that realm to come to our realm.
It's almost like a wormhole.
It's basically connecting with some creature in the divine realm that you're attuned to, and giving them a portal to be able to come through into our realm. The problem is they are aligned with that realm, so they cannot survive here for long, and they tend to have negative effects on the environment that they come to, because they are specifically aligned to that deity and that realm, and that divinessence.
So the issue is, especially, so the realm of the gods is suffused with the gods' divinessence, and putting matter, let's say terrestrial matter, earthly matter, into contact with that much concentration of divinessence, it's a combustible relationship. The world will burn. This is one of the reasons why the gods don't themselves come to the material plane, the world, is they have in the distant past, but it caused cataclysms because the gods' divinessence, their divine radiance, was so intense that it caused the world literally to disintegrate and burn, and mass destruction ensued from the gods being here. So the gods can't physically manifest in the world because it's not aligned to their divinessence. But the divine creatures of the gods' realms have less concentration. It's certainly more than anyone on earth. And as they come through, they will start to cause the world to burn in much more minor ways than if the gods themselves were to appear. But it's very dangerous. There are some places in the world, particularly in temples of the gods, where the temple environment has been conditioned with sufficient divinessence to make it possible for the divine creature to come through and not cause massive destruction inside the temple. As long as that's aligned appropriately. But
and I think massive destruction is, I mean, it's localized.
It's localized.
The area surrounding the creature that was summoned, and what that creature looks like is very different depending on the deity and the
flora and fauna of every god's realm is unique to that god.
But I will say that this is another example that any deity can access this, but some are better than others, or some put a higher priority on this. Urin's a good example in that they are fascinated by, in their mind, what Urin has created in Urin's domain, and so they will summon one of Urin's creatures to study, admire, to get inspiration from it, and they are some of the best in the world at being able to build an environment that creature can stay longer. I mean, the creature can never stay forever, without constant maintenance in making sure that area is in as close of alignment as they can.
Yeah. So having a zoo or a menagerie of divine creatures from the realms of the gods is not possible or feasible, and not accessible from anyone outside in the world who isn't sufficiently aligned. What I will say is, you can only open a portal into the realm of the god with which you're aligned to their divinessence. So you can't use Viance's divinessence to open a portal into Terathia's realm. It doesn't work that way. Only someone who's attuned to Terathia's divinessence can do that. And the other thing that I wanted to mention here, and this is why we maybe save this one towards the end, is that divinessence alone is insufficient to open the portal. You need also Metalon. You need to also channel Elan at the same time to be able to open a portal. And there is the ability in the world. It's fairly rare, but there are people who can do it. Although there are people who can work together most of the time. It's even more rare that you have one individual who can maintain both the Elan and perform the Metalon and the divinessence to manage both of them at the same time to create a unified effect through one person doing it. There are a few exceptional individuals who can do it, but it's very, very rare in the world to be able to find one person who can do that.
And very dangerous.
And
as a result, the practice is usually very frowned upon, and if it's allowed at all, it's only in tightly controlled environments,
right,
which makes it difficult for people to learn outside of the priesthood.
That's right.
And that would be a kind of a difference in those benefactions, in that this is one where it is rarely done outside of a priesthood order.
So in terms of costs and limitations on the divine magic system, I would say we have fewer generalized costs. It's unlike Metalon. Channeling divinessence doesn't leave you exhausted, although some of the benefactions performing the benefaction may leave you exhausted, and each benefaction may have its own limitations and costs. So, for example, astral projection, what we call traversification. Astrally projecting your spirit outside of your body carries some very dangerous risks, and there are a lot of there are limitations to that. There's some costs associated with that particular benefaction that are unique to that one, and the other benefactions don't have the same costs. So we're not going to get in on this video to the costs and limitations of each benefaction, but what I will say, and similar with summoning, there's dangers and costs and limitations. But what I will say is, again, we as authors created the limitations and the costs and the stakes for the magic system, making it hard in our mind at least. But in the world, in the books that we show to the readers, we don't always spell all of those out. So that's why I think, going back to one of the questions at the top of the video, is where would you peg us in the hard versus soft magic system? You said somewhere in the middle. And I would say that's right in terms of the reader's experience, maybe somewhere in the middle. I would say, as far as what you and I understand, we're definitely skew more to the hard side of things. We just won't always show all that detail. We'll spare the reader from having to see all that detail. And that may be frustrating for some people who really like explicit hard magic systems spelled out for them so they can see it. And we're very cognizant that choosing not to spell out all the rules may make some of the things that we show in the book run the risk of feeling unearned or like Deus Ex Machina. We're very conscientious of that. We really try to avoid doing that. So as we get through, we've only published book 1 so far. As of the date you may be watching this video, there may be more books out that have spelled out more of those rules. We fully plan to do that. And there will be rules that in world are being discovered in the books. So there will be new laws of magic that no one has known, and you'll be discovering those laws with the people who are actually making those discoveries. So there's a lot more to come in terms of the magic systems and the rules and the costs and the rest of it. If you we'd be very interested to know, especially if you've read the book so far, whether you like the way that we've done the magic systems, whether there are criticisms that you have, things that don't make sense, things that appear to be contradictions. We hopefully have answered all the questions and aren't coming out of nowhere, in our own minds at least, but we recognize that that may not be every reader's experience.
Yeah,
especially
and I would certainly hope also
only.
that if you are out there looking to create a magic system to create your world, that I would hope that in almost every author's case, the reader's going to feel it's more of a soft system than the writer does, because the writer understands the limitations
Should
of
understand.
rules. Yeah, and I think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
I think any writer that's crafting their story just needs to understand what can and can't be done, and stay consistent with that, so it feels lived in, and it feels like this is a clear process that is understandable. Whereas if you're just keeping it soft in your own mind, it might seem fanciful and neat. And quite honestly, that's one of the strengths of a soft magic system, is it feels there's this wondrous awe about it. It's got a mystical quality, that there is the unknowable. And I think that by understanding the limitations as a writer, but then not necessarily spelling them all out to the reader, you can still leave that sense of awe, but have a grounded feel to it because you know where that limitation is.
Yep. All right. I think that'll do it for today. Thanks everyone for joining us. And until next week, enjoy the journey.
Yep. Keep reading. Thank you.